I stood in the lobby of the First National Bank, feeling the cold air conditioning hum against my skin. It was a normal Tuesday, or so I thought. I had come to withdraw $5,000 for the final down payment on the venue, a beautiful glass conservatory I had dreamed about since I was a little girl. We were 3 weeks away from saying I do. The teller, a young woman with a kind face, looked at her screen, then looked at me, then back at the screen. She cleared her throat, her expression shifting from professional to deep pity. "Ms. Thorne, I'm afraid there's an issue with the transaction," she said softly. I leaned in, my heart giving a small, nervous thump. "Is the system down?" I asked. She shook her head and lowered her voice so the people in line behind me wouldn't hear. "No, ma'am. It's just that the balance in your joint savings account is currently $12.45. I felt like the floor had vanished beneath my feet. We had $45,000 in that account yesterday. It was the fund we had built over 3 years of double shifts and skipped vacations. My breath hitched as I gripped the edge of the marble counter. "That's impossible," I managed to choke out. "Check again. My fiancé, Julian Gable, and I are the only ones with access. We just deposited my bonus last week." I walked out of the bank, my legs feeling like lead. Julian was sitting in the car outside, tapping his fingers on the steering wheel to a song on the radio. He looked so calm, so perfect. I got in and slammed the door. "Where is the money, Julian?" I whispered, my voice cracking. He jumped, his face turning pale instantly. "What? What are you talking about, Clara?" I threw the bank receipt onto the dashboard. $12. That's all we have. Where is our wedding fund? He let out a long, shaky breath and looked at me with puppy dog eyes. "Clara, please don't be mad. It was an emergency. My mom," she called me crying. "Her house was about to be seized because of a medical lien she never told us about. I had to wire it immediately to save her home. I was going to tell you tonight, I swear. I'm going to get a bridge loan and pay it all back before the wedding. I just couldn't let my mother be homeless." He grabbed my hand, but for the first time in 4 years, I felt a wave of coldness. He didn't ask me. He didn't text me. He just took the money I worked for and gave it away. "You should have told me," I said, staring straight ahead. I spent the afternoon in a daze, trying to convince myself that Julian was just being a good son. But something felt wrong. Julian's mother, Mrs. Gable, was many things: arrogant, demanding, and cold, but she was also meticulous with money. I decided to call her, just to see how she was holding up. I expected her to be in tears or stressed. Instead, the phone rang several times before she picked up. I could hear the sound of steel drums and laughter in the background. "Clara? Why are you calling me at this hour? Do you know what time it is in the Caribbean?" she snapped. I blinked, confused. "Caribbean? I thought you were at home dealing with the house situation." She let out a sharp, mocking laugh. "The house? The house is fine, dear. I'm currently on a 7-day luxury cruise. Julian's sister won it at work and gave it to me. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a massage appointment. Don't call me again unless it's a real emergency." She hung up. The world tilted. There was no medical lien. There was no emergency. Julian had lied to my face, and he had used his mother as a shield to steal $45,000 of my hard-earned money. That night, Julian was extra attentive. He made dinner, brought me wine, and kept talking about our beautiful future. Every word felt like a slap. I waited until he fell into a deep sleep, then I crept over to his gym bag. I had noticed him carrying it everywhere lately, even though he hadn't been to the gym in weeks. I dug through the side pockets and felt something hard. A second phone. My heart hammered against my ribs as I pulled it out. It didn't have a passcode. Julian always thought he was too smart to be caught. I opened the messaging app. The first contact was Chloe. I scrolled through the messages. They were filled with "I love yous" and photos. But the one that broke me was a photo of a small, white house with a "sold" sign in front of it. The down payment cleared today, baby. Julian had written. Our secret castle is officially ours. Clara has no idea. She thinks the money went to my mom. We move in the day after the big show is over. I sat on the bathroom floor, the blue light of the phone illuminating my tears. He didn't spend the money on an emergency. He spent it on a house for his mistress. He was planning to marry me, just to keep the appearances up while building a life with someone else. I wanted to scream. I wanted to wake him up and throw the phone at his face. But then I remembered the sample stories I had read about viral justice. If I confronted him now, he would just make up another lie. He would gaslight me, tell me the house was an investment for us, or blame the woman. I needed to be smarter. I realized that out of that $45,000, I had contributed nearly $38,000. It was my bonus, my inheritance from my grandmother, and my overtime pay. I wasn't just a heartbroken fiancé, I was a victim of financial theft. I wiped my eyes and put the phone back. I walked back into the bedroom and watched him sleep. He looked so innocent, but I knew the truth now. I decided right then that I wasn't going to cancel the wedding. Not yet. I was going to let the big show happen, but the ending was going to be very different from the one Julian was expecting. I spent the rest of the night making a list of every person I needed to call. I was going to build a cage for Julian Gable, and I was going to use his own greed to lock the door. The next morning, I called in sick to work. I went to see a man named Silas, a private investigator, who specialized in high-stakes domestic fraud. I showed him the bank statements and the photos I took of the secret phone. Silas was a sharp man with a salt and pepper beard. He looked at the evidence and nodded slowly. This isn't just an affair, Clara, he said. This is systematic fraud. Over the next 4 hours, Silas dug deeper into Julian's history. He found out that Julian hadn't just emptied the wedding fund. He had been funneling small amounts, 200 here, 500 there, from my personal savings for over 6 months. He had used my digital signature on loan applications. He had even taken out a secret $20,000 renovation loan for the house in Chloe's name, but he used my credit score to guarantee it. If he defaults on that house, the bank comes after you, Silas warned. My blood ran cold. Julian wasn't just cheating, he was destroying my financial life so he could start his with her. I authorized Silas to track Chloe and find out exactly who she was. I needed every piece of leverage I could get my hands on before the big day. A few days later, Julian's mother, Mrs. Gable, returned from her cruise. She insisted on a lunch to discuss the seating chart. She sat across from me in a fancy bistro, wearing a necklace that I suspect was bought with my wedding money. She looked at me with that familiar, cold disdain. Clara, I've been looking at the guest list, she started, sipping her tea. I really think you should trim down your side of the family. They're a bit loud for the kind of event the Gables usually Host. And that dress you chose, it's a bit plain, isn't it? But then again, you've always been a plain girl. You should be lucky Julian chose you. He could have had anyone. I forced myself to smile. And take a sip of water. I'm very lucky, Mrs. Gable, I said calmly. Inside, I was thinking about the recording Silas had found of Julian calling her a senile old bat to Chloe. I wondered how she would feel if she knew her precious son thought she was a burden he only tolerated for her inheritance. I've made some changes to the wedding plans, I told her. I think the final reveal will be exactly what the Gables deserve. She smiled, thinking I was finally learning my place. She had no idea the place I was preparing for her was in the front row of a total disaster. As the wedding drew closer, Silas delivered the final piece of the puzzle. He had found Chloe's identity. She wasn't just some stranger, she was a woman Julian had met at his high school reunion a year ago. But here was the kicker, Julian had invited her to our wedding. He had listed her on the guest list as a distant cousin from out of state. He was planning to have his mistress present while he stood at the altar with me. He wanted her to see the wealth he was providing. To show off the fancy venue and the expensive party, all paid for by me. He was even planning to introduce her to his business partners that night to pave the way for their new life together. I looked at the guest list and saw her name, Chloe Vance. I felt a surge of rage so powerful it made my hands shake. He wanted a show. I was going to give him the performance of a lifetime. I began calling the vendors one by one. I told them there would be a change in the program. I moved all the contracts into my name only, using the evidence of Julian's fraud to convince the companies to let me strip his access. I was now the sole owner of the wedding. And I was about to change the script. I met with the venue manager, the caterer, and the florist in secret. I didn't cancel the orders. Instead, I made a very specific request. The luxury menu? Cancel it, I told the caterer. I want the simplest, cheapest options for the main course. But keep the expensive wine for my table only. I told the florist to skip the elaborate centerpieces and use the money to set up a massive high-definition screen behind the altar. I want it to be a tribute video, I told the videographer. I'll provide the footage myself. The vendors were confused, but since I was the one paying the final invoices, they agreed. I also visited the lawyer Paul again. We prepared a formal complaint for fraud and a civil suit for the recovery of the $45,000 plus damages. I had a process server ready to attend the ceremony. I wasn't just ending a relationship, I was conducting a legal execution. Every time Julian kissed me goodnight or told me he loved me, I mentally checked off another step in my plan. I felt like a ghost haunting my own life, waiting for the moment I could finally move on. The stakes were high, but I had never felt more focused. The week of the wedding, I planted a voice recorder in Julian's car. I needed one final confirmation of his intent. When I retrieved it 2 days later, I sat in my parked car and listened. The recording was crystal clear. Julian was on the phone with Chloe. Yeah, she still thinks the money went to my mom, Julian laughed. The look on her face at the bank was priceless, Chloe. She's so gullible. We just have to get through the ceremony, get the gifts, which should be at least another 20 grand, and then I'll tell her it's over. I've already got the divorce lawyer on standby. We'll be in the new house by Monday. I just need her to pay for the reception first. Chloe's voice came through, giggling. You're so bad, Julian. I can't wait to see her in that dress. Julian replied, it's a costume, baby. Just a costume. You're the one I'm really marrying. I turned off the recorder and sat in the silence. The last bit of guilt I felt about ruining him disappeared. He wasn't just a cheater, he was a predator. He was using a sacred ceremony as a fundraising event for his new life. I wiped a single tear from my cheek and smiled. The big show was only 48 hours away, and I was the director now. Silas called me the day before the rehearsal. He had discovered something even darker. Julian had been using my social security number to open multiple credit cards in my name. He had already maxed out 3 of them to buy high-end furniture for the fixer-upper he bought for Chloe. The total debt he had put in my name was over $60,000. If I didn't act now, my credit would be ruined for a decade. You need to file a police report for identity theft immediately, Silas said. I told him to wait. If I file it now, he'll get a call from the precinct. I want him at that altar. I want everyone he knows to see what he is. Silas agreed but warned me that I was playing a dangerous game. I spent that afternoon at the police station, but I worked with a detective I knew from high school. I filed the report, but we agreed to keep it unprocessed for 24 hours. I had the case number and the evidence ready to go. My entire financial future was hanging by a thread, but I had never felt more powerful. I was an underdog who had finally found her teeth. I went to the rehearsal dinner that night and played the role of the blushing bride to perfection. The rehearsal dinner was held at a beautiful garden restaurant. Julian's entire family was there, along with my bridesmaids. My friends noticed I was quiet, but they assumed it was just pre-wedding jitters. You okay, Clara? My maid of honor asked, squeezing my hand. You seem distant. I smiled and squeezed back. I'm just taking it all in. Tomorrow is going to be a day none of us will ever forget. Julian's sister, who I now knew had helped him hide his affair, tried to fish for information. So, is everything ready? No last-minute changes, she asked, her eyes narrowing. I nodded. Everything is exactly where it needs to be, Sarah. I've taken care of every detail. Julian stood up and made a toast. He spoke about honesty, partnership, and the sacred bond of marriage. He looked me in the eyes and said he couldn't imagine a life without me. I recorded the whole thing on my phone under the table. The hypocrisy was so thick I could almost taste it. I sat there, sipping my water, and thought about the $60,000 of debt he had put on my head. Tomorrow, I was going to hand that debt back to him with interest. The countdown was at 24 hours. I didn't sleep at all the night before the wedding. I spent the hours moving the rest of my belongings out of our shared apartment. I had rented a small, secure storage unit and a new apartment on the other side of town. By 4 a.m., the place we had called home was empty of everything that belonged to me. I left Julian's clothes and his gym bag right where they were. I even left a small note on the kitchen counter, "See you at the altar." I knew he would think it was a romantic gesture. I arrived at the bridal suite at 8 a.m. The hair and makeup artists began their work, transforming me into the bride everyone expected to see. Julian sent me a text at 10 a.m. "Can't wait to start our life together today, Clara. I love you." I stared at the screen for a moment, then typed back, "Neither can I, Julian. Today is the start of a whole new chapter." I felt a strange sense of peace. The big show was finally here. My heart was no longer breaking, it was hardening into a diamond. I looked at myself in the mirror, the white lace and silk a stark contrast to the fire in my eyes. I was ready. The venue was the glass conservatory, and it looked spectacular. I had paid for the best lighting and the best sound system, all the better to ensure everyone could see and hear the truth. I arrived in the limo and stayed in the back, watching the guests arrive. I saw Julian's family in the front row. They looked smug, dressed in their finest, acting as if they were royalty. Then, I saw her. Chloe Vance walked in, wearing a white, floor-length lace dress. It was a direct insult, a way of saying she was the real bride. She sat in the fourth row, whispering to a friend and pointing at the altar. I felt a cold surge of adrenaline. Julian was standing at the front, looking like a storybook prince. He was smiling, greeting people, acting the part of the happy groom. He had no idea that the limo he arrived in was already being reported as part of a fraudulent lease. He had no idea that the apartment he was planning to return to was empty. He had no idea that in 30 minutes, his entire world was going to go up in flames. I took a deep breath, gripped my bouquet, and prepared to walk. The music started, a beautiful, sweeping orchestral piece. The doors to the conservatory opened, and the guests stood up. I walked down the aisle alone. I had told my father I wanted to do this as a symbol of my independence, and though he was confused, he respected my wish. Julian looked at me, a fake tear in his eye. He reached out his hand as I approached the altar, but I didn't take it. I didn't even look at him. I reached the front, turned around, and looked out at the sea of faces. I saw my friends, my family, and the people who actually loved me. And I saw the Gables. I saw Chloe. The officiant began the ceremony, speaking about the solemnity of the vows. I waited for the part where he asks if anyone has any reason why these two should not be joined. Usually, that's a formality. But today, it was the cue. I raised my hand. The officiant stopped. A murmur ran through the crowd. Julian let out a nervous laugh. Clara? What are you doing? Is this a joke? I looked him dead in the eye. This isn't a joke, Julian. But our relationship is. And I think it's time. Everyone saw the punchline. I turned to the videographer and gave a sharp nod. Please play the tribute video, I said, my voice projecting through the high-end speakers. The lights in the conservatory dimmed, and the massive screen behind us flickered to life. The guests expected a montage of our engagement. Photos. Instead, the screen showed a high-definition recording of Julian's bank transfers. The numbers were clear. $45,000 moved to Chloe Vance, down payment. Then, a series of screenshots from Julian's secret phone appeared. The texts about the piggy bank and the easy manipulation were displayed in giant letters for everyone to read. The sound system played the recording from his car, the one where he laughed about the costume I was wearing. The room went deathly silent. I watched Julian's face turn from pale to gray to a sickly shade of green. He looked at the screen, then at me, then at the guests. The sound of his own voice mocking his mother as a senile old bat filled the air. Mrs. Gable stood up, her hand over her mouth, her face a mask of horror. The big show had officially begun, and I wasn't the one being humiliated. The conservatory erupted. People were standing up, shouting, and whispering. Julian's sister Sarah tried to run to the front to stop the video, but Silas, my investigator, blocked her path. I pulled a microphone from the bouquet and spoke over the noise. Julian, you told me the wedding fund went to save your mother's house. But we all just saw where it really went. It went to a house for Chloe Vance, who is sitting right there in the fourth row, wearing white, no less. I pointed a finger at Chloe. She looked like she wanted to melt into the floor. You also used my identity to rack up $60,000 in debt. You thought I was gullible. You thought I was a plain girl who was lucky to have you. But the truth is, you're just a common thief who was lucky I didn't catch you sooner. Julian tried to grab the microphone, his eyes wild with desperation. Clara, let me explain. It's not what it looks like. I was doing it for us. I pushed him away. For us? You were planning to move into that house the day after the wedding. Well, you can move in today. But you'll be doing it alone. Just as Julian started to scream at me, Silas and a man in a dark suit stepped forward from behind the floral arrangements. The man in the suit held out a stack of legal documents. Julian. Gable? You've been served, he said, his voice loud enough for everyone to hear. This is a summons for a civil lawsuit regarding fraud and forgery. Also, Detective Miller is waiting for you in the lobby regarding the identity theft report filed yesterday. The guests gasped. This wasn't just a wedding drama, it was a legal execution. Julian looked at the papers as if they were a death warrant. Mrs. Gable was now in a full-blown meltdown. She was screaming at Julian, not for the fraud, but for what he said about her. A senile old bat, she shrieked, her voice echoing through the glass walls. I gave you everything. I paid for your car. I paid for your school. The Gable family began to turn on each other right there at the altar. It was a roller coaster of emotions. Shock, anger, and for me, a profound sense of catharsis. I had spent weeks in the dark, and now the light was blinding everyone. I looked at the Gables, the royalty, who thought I wasn't good enough for them. They were a mess of tears and shouting. I turned back to the guests. I want to apologize to my friends and my family, I said into the microphone. You came here for a celebration. And we're still going to have one. But the luxury catering? The $200 a plate dinner the Gables were expecting? I canceled it. A murmur of confusion went through the crowd. I replaced it with a simple buffet for my guests. As for the Gables and Julian, the venue fee for the next 4 hours is currently in Julian's name. I moved the contract this morning. If you want to stay in this room, Julian, you'll have to find a way to pay the $15,000 balance. Since the wedding fund is gone, I suggest you ask Chloe for the down payment back. I saw Chloe stand up. She looked at Julian with pure hatred. She realized that the house he'd bought her was tied to a loan he couldn't pay, and she was now part of a fraud investigation. You're on your own, Julian, she yelled, throwing her glass of water toward the altar before storming out. She had realized he played her just as much as he played me. I took off my veil and handed it to Julian. He was shaking, holding the legal papers, his face a mask of total defeat. Here, I said quietly. You wanted a costume. Now you have one. I turned to the officiant. We're done here. I walked back down the aisle, but this time, my head was held high and I was smiling. My bridesmaids followed me, their faces full of awe and support. As I passed the front row, I looked at Mrs. Gable. She was slumped in her chair, her royal dignity shattered. I didn't feel sorry for her. She had encouraged Julian's arrogance for years. I walked out of the conservatory and into the bright sunlight. My father was waiting for me at the door. He didn't say a word, he just wrapped me in a huge hug. I'm proud of you, Clara, he whispered. You handled that like a queen. We got into the limo, the one I had paid for with my own separate account, and drove away. I looked back at the glass building and saw the blue lights of a police cruiser pulling into the driveway. The big show was over, and the credits were finally rolling on. Julian Gable's Life of Lies. The aftermath was even more satisfying than the ceremony. Julian was arrested that afternoon for identity theft and forgery. Because he had emptied our joint account, he didn't even have the money for a decent lawyer. His mother, still reeling from the senile old bat comment, refused to spend a single cent on his defense. Sarah, his sister, was also under investigation for helping him hide the offshore transfers. The house he bought for Chloe was seized by the bank as part of the fraud investigation. Since I had filed the police report and the civil suit immediately, I was able to get a court order freezing the assets. Within 2 months, I had recovered $35,000 of the original $45,000. It wasn't everything, but it was enough to clear the debt he had put in my name. I hired a sharp financial team to repair my credit score. It was a long road, but for the first time in my life, I was the one in control. I wasn't the plain girl anymore. I was a survivor who had turned a betrayal into a masterpiece of justice. My story went viral on local social media, and I received thousands of messages from women who had been in similar situations. I wasn't just a victim, I was an icon of empowerment. 6 months later, I was standing on a balcony overlooking the ocean in Bali. I had used some of the recovered money to take the solo trip I had always dreamed of. I had quit my job and started my own consulting firm, helping women protect their financial assets in relationships. My business was thriving, and my heart was finally light. I looked at the sunset and thought about that Tuesday at the bank. I remembered the pit in my stomach and the cold fear. But then I thought about the altar. I thought about the look on Julian's face when the video started playing. I didn't feel anger anymore. I didn't even feel the need for more revenge. The truth had arrived. And it had done its work. I pulled out my phone and saw a news alert. Julian had been sentenced to 3 years in prison. He had lost his job, his house, and his family. He was exactly where he deserved to be. I took a deep breath of the salt air and smiled. I was no longer defined by what Julian had taken from me. I was defined by what I had built for myself. I was Clara Thorne, and I was finally free. The wedding fund was gone, but I had gained something much more valuable. My own worth. My phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. It was a long, rambling apology. From Sarah, Julian's sister. She claimed she was pressured into helping him and asked if we could meet for coffee to clear the air. I didn't even reply. I simply blocked the number. I had learned the hard way that loyalty is a choice, and she had chosen to betray me for years. I realized that my circle didn't need to be large, it just needed to be honest. I spent the afternoon at a local orphanage, volunteering my time to teach the children about basic finance. It was a small way of giving back, of making sure the next generation was smarter than I had been. I felt a deep sense of purpose that I never had when I was with Julian. He had tried to make me invisible, to turn me into a piggy bank for his own greed. But in doing so, he had forced me to see myself clearly for the first time. I was strong, I was capable, and I was unshakable. I sat on the beach that night and watched the tide come in. The waves washed away the footprints in the sand, just as the last 6 months had washed away the ghost of the woman I used to be. I was a new person now, and I liked her much better. I returned home from Bali feeling refreshed and powerful. My business continued to grow, and I was featured in a national magazine as an expert on financial safety. I received a letter from my lawyer, Paul. He informed me that the civil suit was finalized, and I had been awarded an additional $20,000 in damages from Julian's remaining estate, which consisted mostly of his share of his grandmother's inheritance. It was poetic justice. The man who tried to steal my future was now paying for it literally. I donated half of that money to a local domestic abuse shelter. I wanted to make sure that other women had the resources to escape the kind of predator Julian was. I visited my parents that weekend. My father was working in the garden, and my mother was in the kitchen. They looked at me with so much pride. "You're different, Clara," my mother said, handing me a cup of tea. "You have a light in you that I haven't seen in a long time." I smiled. "I found it at the altar, Mom. I found it in the middle of the mess." I realized that the worst thing that ever happened to me had actually been the best thing. It had stripped away the lies and left only the truth. And the truth was beautiful. Today, I walked past the conservatory where the wedding was supposed to take place. It was a beautiful spring day, and another couple was arriving for their ceremony. I saw the bride in her white dress, looking nervous and happy. For a moment, I felt a pang of memory, but it was quickly replaced by a sense of peace. I whispered a small prayer for her, that her partner was as honest as he looked, and that she knew her own worth before she walked down that aisle. I got into my car and drove to my office. My name was on the door in gold letters, Thorne Financial Consulting. I sat at my desk, opened my laptop, and started working on a new plan for a client. I am no longer a passenger in my own life. I am the director, the author, and the hero. Julian Gable emptied our wedding fund, but he gave me the keys to my own empire. And that was a trade I would make every single time. The big show is over, and the life I'm living now is the one I was always meant to have. I am Clara Thorne, and I am finally, completely, home. The story of the plain girl is finished. The story of the woman who won has just begun.